Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Living Well with Schizophrenia YouTube channel. In today's video, I'm going to address a common misconception that people have, and that is around the words psychotic and psychopathy. Now they sound similar, and I think a lot of people get them confused. And so in today's video, I'm going to address this, and I'm going to differentiate the two and talk about why it's also harmful to conflate the two as the same thing. So the terms psychotic and psychopath are used quite frequently in popular culture and sometimes are used interchangeably, which is not correct. And they both represent serious mental illnesses, but different mental illnesses. And so if someone is psychotic, it means that they are losing touch with reality and that, there is a break between their experience of what's going on around them and what is actually going on around them. Whereas someone who is deemed a psychopath is often kind of unable to feel for others and often acts in kind of reckless or antisocial ways. So it's kind of important to differentiate in the sense that psychosis is often a symptom of another illness, such as schizophrenia or bipolar or depression or even like epilepsy or anything like that. And psychopathy or psychopath is more of a personality trait linked to antisocial personality disorder. Okay, so we're going to dive a little further into what each of these terms really mean. So we're going to start off with psychosis. So essentially, psychosis is when something is affecting the way your brain understands the world around you, and there's that break in terms of your perception of reality. And it's often also referred to as a psychotic episode. So a psychotic episode or psychosis can make it really hard for you to communicate with other people and to think clearly and to engage normally with other people. And it also often leads to hallucinations where you see, hear, feel, smell, taste different things that aren't necessarily there, that you are hallucinating. It also includes delusions, which is when you have a false belief about something. And these may include the false belief or the delusion that people are trying to harm you or that people are controlling your thoughts or things like that. Being in psychosis can be a really frightening experience and can lead you to withdraw or to stop engaging with people around you and to stop taking care of yourself. It's estimated that about 3 in 100 people will experience an episode of psychosis in their lifetime, but it's also known that if you receive medical help early on in the process of a psychotic episode, it can lead to significantly reducing the harms or negative effects of it going forward. Okay, so that is a brief summary of what psychosis is. Now we're going to move on into psychopathy. And so psychopathy is often when people who have psychopathy don't follow typical social rules or expectations. And they often do things like lie often, have an inflated view of themselves. They're often unable to control their impulses. They may not feel guilt or regret for actions that hurt others, and they often try to manipulate other people. And so even just within this list of characteristics, it's clear to see that psychosis is a lot more, a symptom of something bigger that's happening, and it's an experience that the person is experiencing, whereas psychopathy is more personality traits and more to do with how a person engages with the world around them. And as it stands right now, researchers aren't really sure what causes psychopathy. Okay, so I've been using the term psychopathy, and you often hear people use the term psychopath or sociopath, but what do these words really mean? It's interesting because you won't actually find psychopathy in the DSM, or the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which is what is used in North America to diagnose mental disorders. It's actually not in there, and what is used instead in there is the term antisocial personality disorder. And so the typical definition of sociopath and psychopath falls under the antisocial personality disorder within the DSM. Most experts believe that psychopaths and sociopaths share a similar set of traits. People who fall under these categories typically have a poor inner sense of right or wrong, and they also often have difficulty sharing feelings with other people or empathizing with feelings with other people. But there are some differences as well. Typically, a psychopath does not have a conscience, whereas a sociopath may have a small bit of conscience, although it's still weak. Both lack empathy and have a hard time putting themselves in someone else's shoes and understanding what someone else may be feeling in any given moment. However, a psychopath has even less regard for others and often sees other people as objects that they can use for their own personal gain. Now, it's really important to note that, for both psychosis and psychopathy, in movies and TV shows, they're often depicted as the villains. With psychosis, they're depicted as the unstable killers committing some horrible act of violence because of their psychosis. And similar with psychopaths, they're often deemed as being these cold-blooded killers who are just, will do anything and everything, including taking someone's life to get what they want. However, while it is true that both parties can be violent, most of the time they are not in both cases. And so for people who have antisocial personality disorder, they can be violent again, but most of the time they are not. And typically they use manipulation and reckless behavior to get what they want rather than violence. And so similarly with psychosis, the incidence of violence is actually a lot lower than people commonly believe. There was a study out of the University of California that actually found that out of repeat offenders within the jail system, only 1 in 20 of repeat offenders were experiencing psychosis before their violent crimes. And that is a lot lower than people typically believe because, there's often this conception of mentally ill people running around committing acts of violence against people. And that's just not really a fair representation of this population. And so, it's really important to be really cognizant of how we're using both of these in terms of our language, in terms of how we're talking about people who experience psychosis and how we're talking about people who have antisocial personality disorder. And when we're using terms like psycho or psychopath or psychotic or, things like that, we need to be really mindful of what behaviors we are attaching those labels to and really thinking about whether or not they are accurately describing the mental illness that they relate to. Okay, so I hope that dissecting those two terms briefly helped to kind of understand the differences between the two and why they can't be used interchangeably. So the big takeaways that I want to impart are that, psychosis is a symptom of something that's happening. And it is when somebody loses touch with reality. And, there's that lack of awareness about what's going on and they're engaging with an altered form of reality. And so, we talked a bit about violence. And so if violence does come up, it's often not with motive. And it's often, because of the alternate reality that they're experiencing. And so they may think that they are actually helping someone, or they may just be trying to appease voices, or, there's just reasons like this for their peculiar behavior or their violent behavior if that happens. But again, violence is not a common symptom of either of these. But that is kind of what's going on with psychosis. Whereas psychopathy or antisocial personality disorder is much more linked to a person's personality. And so how they engage with others and with the world around them. And it is much more kind of manipulative. And I don't want to stigmatize this one too much because it is a legitimate mental illness as well. And, we need to be careful about how we're talking about it and not villainizing it too much. But it is characterized by more impulsive, reckless behavior and kind of manipulative tendencies, as opposed to losing touch with reality like in psychosis. And so those are the major differentiations between psychosis and psychopathy. Okay, so thank you so much for watching this video. I hope it helped to kind of give a better picture of why it's important to differentiate the two terms of psychosis and psychopathy, and why it's important to also be aware of, how we're using this language and trying to destigmatize the way we're using this language as much as possible, and trying to stay away from things like psycho and stuff like that, and using these mental illness terms as descriptions of behavior that we don't necessarily understand or agree with or anything like that, and really being mindful of using these terms in the proper way. So if you like this video, please make sure to give it a thumbs up, and also feel free to leave a comment if you have any further insights on differentiating between these disorders. Also, if you would like to help support the creation of future videos like this one, please make sure to check out our Patreon page. The link is in the description below. We're really working hard to keep putting out helpful content for all of you, and so we would really appreciate any support you can give. Thank you. Thank you so much again for watching this video, and as always, wishing you and your loved ones good health. See you in the next video. Bye.